Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is simply called Discerning What is True. What I'm doing tonight is going to be reading from a book here, which I've been reading for the past, well, probably 2 or 3 weeks, if not longer. The book title is called Psychology and Kabbalah. Uh, the particular author is the one who wrote this particular book here, which was recommended me by a gentleman named Phil Langdon. And so we're at the chapter here, chapter 29 here, called Defense Mechanism. So let's see, make sure everything's correct here, lined up. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 29, Defense Mechanism. While an incarnating psyche may be advanced, it is still a shock to be born into the physical world. Initially, the only way a baby can protect itself is to retreat into sleep or into what Freudians see as fantasy. Seen Kabbalistically, this is the withdrawal back into the realm of Yezirah, spelled Yezirah. And some people can actually recall leaving the infantile body only to return when the new situation was accepted. However, there does come a time when the individual has to cope with life on Earth. Here begins the battle between different realities that causes the phenomenon of anxiety. One of Freud's most important observations is to do, okay, what is the deal here? Okay. One of Freud's most important observations was the effect of anxiety on the psyche and the way the triparticle system of the ego, ID, idea, ID, or I'm sorry, not ID, id, and superego deal with them. For example, he noted that the id generates anxieties which distort an infant's picture of reality as it is, dominated by its needs. In this context, anxiety can be seen as a biological or a cellular tension affecting the psyche. But Freud also observed that some anxious anxiety states were quite different from organic discomforts, which rose and disappeared according to their fulfillment. These were disturbances which had no obvious source. Freud eventually defined three basic kinds of anxiety which relate to the three lower levels of reality. The first was a general anxiety that has its roots in the external world. This was quite natural because it was created by the instincts to protect the individual from physical damage or danger. Thus, being frightened of the dark or snakes were normal and formed the basics of a biopsychological defense system, which is Kabbalah relates to the world of Assyria. The second type of anxiety was termed neurotic, and this was precipitated by an individual own ID nefesh, id nefesh drives. Here, the ego is not strong enough to hold the libido and mortito impulses firmly in check. This creates a feeling of insecurity in Yesod, the foundation of the psyche. The example of this might be the tension of sexual frustration or deep-seated anger or fear based upon some early experience. The individual in the wild can do many things to relieve such pressures in the trauma of survival, but the person in civilized society cannot attain so easy a release unless he or she finds a way acceptable to their super-ego idea. Such uninhibited drives can build up enormous heads of energy that distort the lower face of the psychological tree and threaten its efficiency. However, as the tree is a self-regarding system, so it can adjust at certain costs, and hold tensions in check until they can be released. The most obvious device for releasing pent-up forces is sport, which is a contained, what-to-do operation seen at any Cup final or World Series. In many cases, the more to do impulses that is not discharged may generate a neurotic fear of or love of destruction. This is witnessed in a pathological fascination with war and crime movies in which the death instinct is played out in genre. Those who are obsessively opposed to such preoccupations are often applying another defense a device to block the same drives in themselves. Here it must be noted that the mechanism is usually unconscious. This occurs because the super ego idea operating down the side pillars allows Yasat to justify aggression to protect and protest, I should say, meetings, which are often a militant as though who support their tribe or local football team. Many people, it has been observed, find great relief in the release of marches and matches. The third form of anxiety is moral. Here, the superego idea brings pressure to bear on the ego from the unconscious. Values taken in from parents and society create pressures when the person thinks, feels, or does something contrary to their upbringing. The ego may make excuses, but the super ego idea does not take these into account because it exists in a reality based upon collective laws. Having a illicit love affair can be rationalized by the ego, but the super ego idea will still transmit its disapproval and give rise to deep unease in the lower face of the psyche. This is a phenomenon that has driven some to drink, which is a very practical form of ego defense. Moral anxiety is particularly common in spiritual oriented people who suffer the pangs of guilt without apparently having done anything evil. This is the result of a complicated situation for the self, as Tipperell may be protecting Usada ego to preserve its validity. If this were lost before the person was ready to cope with whatever the problem was, then a shattering of the psyche foundation could occur. An example of this was a man who was legitimate and could not accept himself until he had found his inner identity. His unconscious guilt felt that it was his fault. From a karma viewpoint, he may have been right, but was not yet ready to accept it. Few psychologists would take this dimension into account, whereas no Kabbalist would leave it out. There are many defense mechanisms. Some operate upon principles called displacement, end quote, and, quote, sublimation, end quote, in which the tensions are referred to somewhere else in the psyche or body or converted into something different until it can be resolved. In the normal process of psychological development, personal quirks or minor illnesses indicate and alleviate tensions within the structure and dynamics of the psyche, while quite primitive impulses like obstinacy and competitiveness are transformed by the side separate into quite harmless and indeed constructive modes such as stamina and initiative. The conversion of id, nefesh, energy that is not used for sex, bringing up a family or making a living can go into many kinds of activity, ranging from playing games to pass the time to disciplines of self-development. All these processes draw upon energies that could disrupt the ego and so destroy its balance if it were not for the defense mechanisms. As an example of this is the old spinster who knits socks for sailors because her long dead sweetheart was a sea captain. She is guarding her mental equilibrium from emotions, thoughts, and actions that could destroy her if she allowed them into her consciousness. Repression is another form of defense system which operates by withdrawing the ego's attention from any difficulty it cannot cope with, so that it does not disturb the yasada picture of the world or the person's image of themselves. The problem, however, remains and may return in another form out of the unconscious. This occurs because while the ego may have avoided the issue, the self cannot. Moreover, faith often intervenes like the woman who crossed a ocean to avoid a sexual problem but quickly set it up again with a new lover. This indicates that some devices do not block the side pillows or makuk. Reaction formation is a term used to describe something that is repressed by being covered over with its opposite, so that Isad presents the very reverse of what the psyche thinks or feels. An example of this is binge love for someone the individual loves because the social situation demands it. This process can also occur deep in the unconscious, which seeks to counterbalance the ego's view. An incidence of this is the double talk of religious fantasies who preach love but desire to dominate. Seen in tree terms, Seen in tree terms, these are the outer pillars and upper and lower faces overcompensating for some excessive function. The phenomena of projection is when something going on beyond the limited line between Had and Nesa, but denied by Yasat, is projected out on the world. This device gives free passage to many shadow aspects of the psyche that come down one side pillar so as to avoid going to the ego. Instance of this is the Puritan who sees dirt everywhere because he cannot acknowledge his own inner corruption. Projection can be used by either the id or the super-ego-idea. It is seen most obviously in war propaganda that rejects the enemy as all bad while ignoring the home nation's ills. The USA and Russia see each other as imperialists, yet both view themselves as upholding revolutionary ideas. Interjection is also used by the psyche as a defense mechanism in that it can absorb what can protect the person. For example, the ego may adopt the Yasada image of a peer group in order not to be victimized by them. To wear the same outfit is to be safe in the clan, and the man who concurs with his boss's will until he finds a more secure new job. He is doing exactly the same. Here, Yasad, with his chameleon qualities, protects the person by physical and psychological camouflage. Quote, regression, end quote, is a mode by which the ego avoids a difficult presence by retreating into the past. This may take the form of returning, for instance, to a state of childhood when life was less complex. The Holden pastime of sailing toy boats is not just a hobby, but a serious business for those who wish to escape reality. Many people regress while realizing it when they smoke or take a drink in a tense situation as they unconsciously seek the security of the nipple, according to Freud, that is. However, this release may be vital in order to protect them from what they really think and feel about their situation at that point. Here's where Makuk takes over from the ego in sensual stimulation and relaxation. Humor is a useful device that deals with awkward situations, like the story of the rabbi whose brother was dishonest. The rabbi avoided him until he was confronted with the words, quote, so who are you that you should avoid me? You have a brother who is a thief, whereas my brother is a rabbi, end quote. This is the manipulation of the Yasad and the super-ego-idea in order to avoid a Makukan reality. The same is true of the man who said, quote, my wife divorced me for religious reasons. She worshiped money and I had none. End quote. That's pretty, wow. Okay. Here, reality is contrast with fantasy in order to protect the ego of the husband. Such jokes are designed to devalue issues that could impair the psyche's balance. Abraham Lincoln was asked why he always told jokes during the worst moments of the American Civil War. He replied that he would break down under the strain if he did not. He was a desperate he was a depressive anyway and desperately needed to offset his left pillar of severity. Quote, fixation, end quote, is an important defense mechanism. It occurs when the psyche is retarded by some unresolved developmental problem. Thus, while the body and ego may appear adult, the psyche may be quite immature. For example, some women play the eternal girl, even when youth and beauty have gone. And some men will always behave like boys, though they may be 6'3" or run a huge commercial company. This occurs because a vital stage of inner growth has not been completed. Such individuals often have a well-fortified psychology that refuses to acknowledge what it cannot deal with, but this can lead to disaster. Many dictators leave the fixation quality of still playing juvenile games in their public and private lives. Hitler's invasion of Russia was a childish fantasy. Napoleon's failure would have worn off most adults, but he went ahead and millions died. The eternal youth and maid may play the field, but at some point they meet their Waterloo as fate confronts them with a major crisis that forces them to grow. Such crises, be they national or individual, are designed by Providence to dissolve the defense system and prevent the fortress mentality from turning into a prison or asylum. All the foregoing are but samples of the many defense systems that the psyche sees, or not sees, but uses to protect its viability. Their function is to maintain the equilibrium of the psyche until the problem can be solved. Most of these mechanisms are quite unseen, as they operate in the unconscious, which we shall examine next as a general principle. So that's the conclusion of chapter 29 tonight. The night is the 13th of November, 2025. Appreciate you being here. Hope that you're gleaming some of the wisdom that this particular gentleman has given to us. All right, so we thank you for being here, and you have a good night and take care.